what is his name? Jeffrey Samuels? His book on, what is it called? Civilized Shamans. So, especially for those people who are taking David White's course, do you get a sense that this is a more civilized version? I mean, civilized. Sometimes systems are absorbed into a high system, and they lose certain things, and they gain other coherence and so forth. Do you get that sense? For instance, if you compare Tsongkhapa with some of the material in Hindu Tantra, do you find Hindu Tantra to be a bit funkier, for instance?
Yeah, that would be a mild
More aestheticized. It's more like aestheticized.
Yes, aestheticized. Abhinavagupta is, like the Long-chen-pa or the Tsongkhapa of that type of system, where you're trying to take a coherent look at things, and obviously then a lot of funky stuff gets thrown to the side. Thus, I have not read Civilized Shamans. I'm sort of guessing that the civilized, that's what civilized means in Civilized Shamans. Is it? Who's read it? Nobody? Yes? Mm-hmm. Is that what it means?
He wants to work on this pull between clerical Buddhism and shamanic Buddhism in Tibet, and that both Nying-ma and Sarma schools are different.
Sarma means new, for those who don't know Tibetan.
Yeah, which basically generally means everything besides the
Yes.
are different ways of negotiating this tension between these two things.
And that both have this tension.
Yes, right, and the tension is sort of underlying in Tibetan culture.
And are these represented by different people within Nying-ma and within the new schools? Or is the tension present in the same person? You have the clerics within, say, Gelug, and the shamans within Gelug.
But he did make one of the quotes that I gave you. He made the point that although Tsongkhapa is considered to be the epitome of the cleric side, Tsongkhapa also says that some of his most important teachings came from visions of Manjushri.
Absolutely.
So he's got this very strong shamanic side too.
Absolutely. So I think it would be a mistake to separate these into different people. Well, certainly there would be some who are totally given over to, say, debate and would refuse, maybe there'd be some who refuse to do anything else. But actually, like if you go to Dharamsala, as George Dreyfus and I used to say, when they got down to, when at the School of Dialectics they did the rituals for propitiating common deities, we'd be nudging each other and saying, now they're doing the real thing. They pretend all along that what they want to do is debate and reason and so forth, but what they're really into is taking care of those deities, mundane deities, not super-mundane deities here. The mundane ones who are going to make, small troubles or give you small rewards. And if you look at the lifestyles of the greatest of the scholars, they're doing all sorts of what I suppose we are calling now both clerical and shamanic activities. And they move between the one and the other without tension. Without tension. It's something you do. You roll the dice. Somebody comes in, you roll the dice, and you say, no, don't take this medicine, go to that doctor over there. So then this is my point. They move with no tension at all between the two. So is this is this more not a situation of two poles where, and there's tension with one person acting in both, but rather one somehow coherent series of activities that one person engages in throughout the day?
Can we also not say that in the analytic theory, supposedly analytic theory of sutra type concentration and analysis of emptiness, there's also no contradiction whatsoever with the tantric visionary kind of focus on emptiness? In other
Well,
words,
it's interesting, especially with respect to how Long-chen-pa treats the two systems. It's as if Long-chen-pa himself goes, there's a huge divide here, as if one is totally on a conceptual level, which then blows your mind, wondering what he's talking about, and the other is getting down to the actual fact. Whereas practice of sutra systems, whether it be love, compassion, realization of emptiness, these are highly emotive, not just superficially intellectual. I think intellectual, to me, has a very deep meaning, but usually when we talk about intellectual, we take it as being some sort of superficial activity. I mean, I think that's bad intellectual, superficial intellectuality. That's what drives people to crazy religions, you know? You know, you do enough of this, you can't stand it anymore, so you want something that's totally insane. So now, who made up the categories of shamanic and clerical? Is it us? Did this polarity, was this polarity made by us? Now, I think these are quite different activities during the day that Tibetans move through. It's not the same activity, but one person can do it. I mean, it's like having a great intellectual discussion here, great, and moving on to working out at the gym. You don't have to go through some twisted period where you know, and then you get on the other side and.
You refer to us as scholars, like, I don't want to use Western, but
No, us here in this class. We have other activities, eating and listening to music and so forth. These are very different activities. But one person moves seamlessly through most of them. Some of them we have to do are not seamless. I don't know. Certainly people will view others as too much debate, too much, as George and I were making fun of these people for overly getting into this mundane ritual. Certainly among Tibetans, among those who are involved, you view people as on these poles. Anyway, so we're on page 126. In the first new paragraph of page 126, Long-chen-pa says, mantra, however, ascertains non-conceptual wisdom unfabricated by the mind. The essence of truth body is the ground merely through concentrated focus. Concentrated focus on focal points of body, speech, channels, winds, drops of essential fluid. In what sort of tantras do you find this practice, concentrative focus on important points of the body, channels, winds, drops, all this? Highest yoga tantra. Therefore, what is he comparing? What are the two things that he's comparing?
Definition vehicle and highest yoga tantra.
Definition vehicle and highest yoga tantra. So under the guise of a discussion about sutra and tantra, you will notice often, very often, he's talking only about highest yoga tantra. Tsongkhapa criticizes this type of analysis strongly. You can't use features that are unique to highest yoga tantra to serve as a means to distinguish between sutra and tantra in general. Why? Because tantra has four types, at least four types. What kind of defense could you give for Long-chen-pa?
You could say that the essence of Tantra is in highest yoga Tantra, and
Wow,
therefore
it's
everything
already
else.
jumped to that answer. I didn't think anyone would come up with this answer. Yes?
So therefore, that all of Tantra really is in essence in highest yoga Tantra, and the other stuff is just leading to that point. So the essence of Tantra is highest yoga Tantra.
Well, I think that would be his only defense. And now, so then he would, Tsongkhapa could answer back, well, then you are deprecating the so-called three lower tantras, action, performance, and yoga. And so then Long-chen-pa, we'll see if you've got the other step on this. Let's see. Long-chen-pa has to answer back, right? And what could he say back?
So
Okay, so do you, where?
in talking about how Buddhahood could only be attained through highest yoga tantra, that you need highest yoga tantra in order to attain Buddhahood.
He doesn't make that a difference between sutra and tantra, does he?
No, between lower tantra and high. You're talking about deprecating the three lower tantras.
Oh,
So
similar to,
Tsongkhapa also deprecates the three lower tantras, saying that really you need highest yoga tantra to attain Buddhahood.
I see. And Tsongkhapa would answer what?
Yep.
It's not a deprecation, it's a fact. Somebody else?
Well, Long-chen-pa would say, I agree. It is a
Right.
fact.
What is a fact?
It is a fact that you depend on highest yoga tantra
He doesn't say that though, does he? He holds that you can achieve Buddhahood through any of the four tantras, doesn't he?
But it's speed, right?
There's difference in speed.
Out of compassion, and that the superior person's compassion drives them to the fastest.
Yes. Therefore, he holds that you can attain Buddhahood through the three lower tantras. Thus, indeed, from his point of view, Tsongkhapa is deprecating the three lower tantras.
But he says that Tsongkhapa says that only highest yoga tantra can lead to Buddhahood within a single lifetime, whereas Long-chen-pa says tantra in general can.
Right. Correct. Therefore, again, Tsongkhapa is deprecating from Long-chen-pa's point of view the three lower tantras. But
didn't we just sort of establish that Long-chen-pa, when he's talking about Tantra, is talking about highest yoga Tantra?
For the most part, but then he, as Brian was pointing out, he sometimes talks about the three lower tantras. I mean, you correct me on this, and so we're going to have to find where he explicitly talks about the other tantras. Because I sometimes will mix Pudern and Long-chen-pa. Pudern makes the case that you can achieve Buddhahood through the three lower tantras. A longer lifetime. But does Tsongkhapa do, well, rather than trying to fish it out of you, you were so fast, didn't have to fish. So one way to answer somebody back is to say, well, just as you have, I'm doing just what you did. So I want something that where Long-chen-pa can say, just as I have taken highest yoga tantra to be the essence of tantra, so you, Tsongkhapa, have what?
I've taken Kriya Yoga Tantra to be the essence. To have the essence of Tantra.
Okay, correct.
He's taking deity
Yeah,
Oh, or
that
dating.
only those couple tantras within Kriya Tantra that have Deity Yoga are the essence of Kriya Tantra. So just as you've done this, how did you, Jesus, what are you doing? It's reading my mind. This a student came up with some, I don't know, about 6 years ago, 9 years ago. Which I thought was a very, very clever answer. Very clever answer. So just as you within Kriya Tantra are willing to take just a couple tantras as the essence of Kriya Tantra, so I'm taking within all of Tantra, highest Yoga Tantra, as the essence of Tantra. Hard to answer. And comparing, in my comparison, Sutra and Tantra, blah, blah, blah. Yes.
What is Kriya Tantra?
Oh, sorry. We do this so that we can think that, you know, like doctors. We should have special uniforms. Action, action, action. Thank you for stopping us. It's awful. Yes.
With Long-chen-pa saying that what it's the same is the basis, and that doesn't seem to be what Tsongkhapa says, even in highest yoga tantra. Isn't what they talk about tantra a bit different too, where they start? I was thinking, would Long-chen-pa consider what Tsongkhapa considers highest yoga tantra, would he consider it tantra, or would even be considered within the sutra frame?
No. I mean, within the,
No,
I don't want to get into the 9 vehicles within Nying-ma, but highest Yoga Tantra, you know, with the stage of generation, stage of completion, in Nying-ma, well, let's do it. Nine vehicles. Divided into each, 3 each. We shouldn't treat Nying-ma in a monolithic way. But what little I know about Nying-ma is limited to Long-chen-pa, and Long-chen-pa is extremely important to Nying-ma, but not necessarily to all.
The anu is charya between
Yes.
Kriya and
So Kriya means action. Now, Upa, Upa is a very odd word, and my speculation on it was Uba, both, because one of the names for performance tantra is both. And you were saying the other day Upaya, right? Was it you or somebody else?
I think I sent you some email or something. Yeah, I've read many texts where it was lost as upaya.
Upaya, which would be method. But I have wondered if it's if it's an off play of the word uba, which is both, U-B-A-J. So here you have action, performance, and yoga. And then for what in the new schools is highest yoga tantra is, this is stage of generation within highest yoga tantra, stage of completion, and of course the real things above even highest yoga tantra, because you have to, well, I mean, there's always got to be something better at minimum. And this is Dzogchen, or I prefer the translation great completeness, because the notion is, or the fact is, that everything is complete within the fundamental, well, everything is complete already. Doesn't need to be made complete. So now, how did we get into this topic?
I asked a question about being both starting, I mean, Long-chen-pa saying that the
Oh, yes.
bases are the same.
So now, Mahan Anu are stage of generation, stage of completion in the new schools, and in Nying-ma itself also. So there's no question about Tantra being Tantra. Okay, the line between Sutra and Tantra is here. Now how would, Tsongkhapa would object to putting the Bodhisattva vehicle here. Because, remember, all of this is included within the great vehicle, and all of these practitioners are Bodhisattvas. That would be one objection. So that was to answer your question. And when Long-chen-pa presents the Tantras, he begins with Kriya, or Jia, as it's mispronounced, because the Sanskrit comes across as, and it's mispronounced in Tibetan as Jia. Often. Yes.
In generation stage and completion stage in highest yoga tantra, I read that those are analogous to yoga with and without signs in the lower tantras.
Analogous in the sense that there's an emphasis in the stage of generation on appearance, having signs here being a face, arms, body, and so forth. And the stage of completion, there is some more emphasis, I don't know, at least there's direct perception of emptiness in the stage of completion, and but it's a gross simplification, which frankly is often made in Long-chen-pa's works, to call the stage of generation be deity yoga and the stage of completion be emptiness yoga. It's a gross simplification. And why does he make such a gross simplification? Really, what he cares about is the great completeness. I mean, this is, if you're going to read Long-chen-pa for something, you read him for the great completeness, you don't read him for the stage of generation and the stage of completion, I think. So, as I was about to say, when he begins discussing the Tantras, he begins with Action Tantra. And he gives just the kind of explanation that Tsongkhapa dumps on at the end of that Deity Yoga book. Does someone have that volume today? I'll read it to you. Anybody have? No one? Oh, wow. As bad as I am. At the very end of that, he says something like, those who explain that Action Tantra is merely for the sake of cleanliness, rituals of cleanliness and so forth, have done an awful job of explaining Action Tantra. And that's just what Long-chen-pa does. I thought, oh, maybe he read Long-chen-pa.
I'm still confused. Highest Yoga Tantra, according to Dzongkhapa, would be the Anuttara Yoga Tantra, wouldn't it?
Yes, which is These two,
Oh, okay.
which we'll now draw in yellow since it's given. Which is, anuttara is just higher, or not anuttara, none higher. Anuttara. Again, make sure everybody never say anuttara, anuttara, anuttara.
So then, for Long-chen, it seems like Tsongkhapa includes, in the division of the vehicles into three, Bodhisattva, solitary realizer, and here vehicle.
Yes.
It seems like he includes, then you, based on that, you have the division into Hinayana and Mahayana. But it seems like Long-chen-pa here is pulling the mantra vehicle further out
Yes.
of the Mahayana and
Yes.
separating it.
It
in a way
seems,
that Tsongkhapa
yes.
doesn't.
Does not. I think Tsongkhapa was very pointedly including all of the tantric systems within the great vehicle. Why? Because the basis of the deeds, the altruistic intention to become enlightened is the same, and the deeds of the six perfections are the same. He wants to emphasize that point. He wants to emphasize the integral nature of Sutra and Tantra. Whereas what Long-chen-pa often does, and you'll get it in Nying-ma explanations, is you have a series of it's almost really plateaus. The vehicles are plateaus. And when you move to one, it's like developing a new attitude or viewpoint within your life. If you think of focal times or turning points in your life where you've developed a new attitude, it's like everything changes. The Nying-ma presentation is more like that. Whereas Gelug is much more of an ordered structure. In fact, one of the people, I think, wouldn't think this about Gelug. Trying to get a view of the whole path, and that's why the presentation of highest yoga tantra so much affects how the lower vehicles are presented. You're told that there's no way to actually achieve enlightenment only through the perfection vehicle, for instance. The attitudes of highest yoga tantra affect how the lower vehicles are presented much more than they do within Nying-ma, I think. Because Nying-ma is more for a revolution of viewpoint, which has its great advantages too. Both have tremendous advantage. Revolution of viewpoint with each vehicle. And if there's contradiction with what's said in the above or lower vehicles, it's like, so what? You've moved on to a new level, and you will move on to another new level. So in fact, you see, whether it's held in Nying-ma that you could achieve Buddhahood through the perfection vehicle, that's highly doubtful. That's, by the time, you get to the great completeness, and that's how it's going to be done anyway. And I don't know, I'm going too far here.
But isn't that the same as when Tsongkhapa says that the sutra vehicle can also attain enlightenment, but it means that really you keep on going up and until you get to highest yoga.
You can attain it, but not through it alone. That's very clearly said, you see.
Right, but that's
Very
probably
clearly
what,
said.
what you can say in these stages too.
But that's-
In one of the levels you can attain, but that means that because you're going to be going to the next level and to the next level, to finally getting to the great completeness.
Well, that's not the argument.
It doesn't seem like that should be possible. If we have a revolutionary change in viewpoint in the Nying-ma system with each plateau and we get to each level, I could see how it could work in the Tsongkhapa's system because his is, like you were saying, more structured and each level kind of builds on the last level. But if Nying-ma doesn't do that, then seems like.
Well, somehow it builds, but you know, when your attitude, when your worldview changes, it doesn't appear that much to be built on what went earlier. I happen to be the type of person who does see a continuity from my very earliest babyhood till now. And even when I go through tremendous changes, I rework how I view things and make it be continuous.
It seems,
Here, yes.
so is the Ati Yoga an added layer above what Tsongkhapa defines as
That,
highest yoga?
yes, yes.
But isn't Dita Yoga a pretty revolutionary change of view?
Oh, I think it is.
So,
Well, you can have, there's no question that, for instance, to go from mainly being concerned with your own welfare to mainly being concerned with others' welfare in Tsongkhapa's system, that's a revolutionary change. However, what I'm talking about is he's presented the stages of the path so that when you come to the latter, you're not undoing the former. For instance, in his presentation of the stages of the path in the sutra system, he does it for one person's practice. You do a practice where you develop concern over lifetimes and cyclic existence, but you don't train in doing this just for your own sake. And for instance, you're told, when you're taught the perfection vehicle, that through it alone you cannot attain enlightenment. That means that perspectives of the higher systems are affecting how the lower are presented. But in terms of a practitioner going through it, I think it's all equally revolutionary. Talking about how it's presented.
right.
And thus, to me, what I have read within Nying-ma is sloppier. Appears to be sloppier.
Seems to logic.
Yes. The overall architecture of the one level, the presentation of the one level affecting how the other is presented is,
Causal logic.
I think, lacking. But it has its own advantages, because you can leave it behind. You can move to a new level. You can open a new horizon. I'm sure much of what I'm saying is going too far.
Can I ask you a question?
But I'm also trying to frame things in the most pejorative way possible. Just so that but without disrespect. I think you're catching this from me. I see Nying-ma and Geluk as like the two sides of a coin. And we're Gagyu, and, Gagyu's in the middle.
If Tsongkhapa is later than Long-chen-pa, Long-chen-pa presented Ati Yoga at the top. Does Tsongkhapa at all talk about it?
There's a long tradition of the Great Completeness system prior to Tsongkhapa. So whether or not he read Long-chen-pa doesn't, he read things like it. He was acquainted with it. There's very little. It's very little. You have to really hunt.
How do the Dalai Lamas deal with it? Aren't they all supposedly great completeness practitioners as well?
Well, there's a tradition that the Dalai Lamas practice both, and especially the fifth Dalai Lama and this Dalai Lama have put tremendous emphasis on both. There's a political advantage to this, in that you're getting the two poles. But when you actually do both, as these two have, then, and it's not just verbal, then it wreaks a certain amount of havoc with especially people in Gelu.
Did I not? I thought I read somewhere that one of Tsongkhapa's teachers was a great completeness.
Yes. I think what they say, there's some joke about the fifth Dalai Lama, that he used to come in through the window. I forgot something about that. Oh, yeah, and the same with this Dalai Lama. And what this Dalai Lama has done, which is very interesting, is there's an earlier statement that Nying-ma and Gelug, well, really, Nying-ma and the old schools and the new schools, the old school and the new schools, their thought comes down to the same thing, which is a very nice political statement, especially if you just leave it at that and don't explain it. You say, oh, everything is one, you know? Oh, yeah. But what this Dalai Lama is trying to do is to show how. And that's what's in the last chapter of Kindness, Clarity, and Insight. And he came here in 1979, gave a talk out in Boonsville, where I live. And then he gave me another version of it in Dharamsala. I took the two versions and edited them together and constructed that chapter. And he would take Gelugpa scholars and gather them together and give them this talk, which created a lot of havoc, because there have been a lot of extremely partisan Gelugpa scholars, and there are now. And in the face, you know, it was like in your face. Really gave them a hard time. Yeah.
For those of us, I have no idea what the Great Completeness is. Could you give a brief description of how it's different from the yoga or high yoga?
There's a great deal of emphasis on primordial enlightenment, that everything or everyone and everything is already enlightened in its own state. Thus, one is seeking to penetrate to a, if I use my own vocabulary, a level where one is seeking to access these spontaneously pure factors that are already present, rather than working at generating a deity, imagining a deity, generating it, or even of focusing on important places of the body and so forth in order to stimulate these and manifest these deep levels of mind. One is seeking to break through the overlay that blocks the innate spontaneity that's already there. That's not too far off. So what's quite interesting here is that Long-chen-pa mainly, isn't he, talking from the viewpoint of Mahayoga and Anu-yoga when he compares Sutra and Tantra. So,
How do you know that?
because he's talking about generating oneself as a deity and concentrating on important places in the body and this and that.
But he's also talking about non-dual wisdom, the expanse.
That's
and that-
everywhere. Yeah, that's true. It's true. And it's often difficult to separate out Maha and Anu from Ati.
Yeah.
Okay. I was walking up the. Did I tell you this story? I was walking down the hill one day with one of the mediums of one of the two state oracles, and after some lectures, and this was 1972, and the Dalai Lama had been lecturing, and we were walking down. It may have been the late fall of 71. Who knows? Who cares? And it's beautiful looking out in the valley. We came to a certain point, and he and I were just chewing the fat soil. And tall, so he died later. He was bitten by some kind of wasp, you know. Awful. Anyway, we were walking down and came to this place that was more clear than others, and the sun was rather low in the sky, you know, the sort of red sun in the more reddish in the late afternoon. And I said to him, who's going to win the election in America coming up? And he said, look over at the sun. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, there's a letter on it. He said, what is it? I said, I don't know. And I don't see it. So whatever I said. And I asked him, well, what is it? He said, I don't know. I don't read English. And of course, I could have asked him to draw it, but I was so, like, oracle? Yeah, give me a break.
So you didn't find out what it was?
No, I didn't.
But now we know.
Yes, it was an N. Okay, so then in the middle of 126 is where we stopped. Also, with respect to a common object of achievement such as wealth, since in the definition vehicle wealth is viewed as following after charity, it is created in accordance with former actions and hence is achieved by the likes of ordinary causes. So, people who didn't want to engage in ordinary charity might choose to some internal, easy way of doing it. That should not, of course, be the case. It should be the case that these are people who could do the ordinary but would like something even better. However, surpassing the hard work of the definition vehicle, which is like commerce, opening a store and farming, you have to plant and cultivate it and get some fruit, some produce. So much better than that is secret mantra, in which wealth is manifestly increased through the use of the water initiation. You can get a water initiation. I don't. You can practice Shumba, his mantra, and so forth, and wealth will descend upon you. It's a lot easier than engaging in giving and so forth. Therefore, such methods surpass the former actions in ordinary system of achievement definition vehicle. And they do, don't they? People would turn away from the harder to do but more important charity to some magical attempt to do the same thing which might actually not work. Thus, if one is on a level where you need to do vast acts of charity, if instead of doing that you retreated to taking the initiation of Shumba and practicing Shumba's mantra, you would be lengthening your process of enlightenment. It would really be unsuitable for you. Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. Yes.
And that you could apply that specifically to deity yoga, where that kind of cynicism is perhaps healthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thus, for instance, in Action Tantra, there being many tantras for people who are afraid of doing deity yoga, and where it's really important to meditate on one's body as dirty, as the four main faults being to see what is unclean as clean, to see what is really miserable to be pleasurable, to see what is really impermanent to be permanent, to see what is non-self to be self. These are like the four root problems. And so for most of us to jump to practice deity yoga without this sort of a firm background is total confusion, where you end up reaffirming your own desires and hatreds because you're divine. This is what appears to you to do, and you don't have this background perspective. Yeah, very much so.
Isn't that exactly what Jung was trying to?
Exactly.
Yes.
And thus it's the reason why Tantra is secret, kept in hiding. You know, you want sex, then you sort of turn to Tantra and say, oh, there's plenty of excuse
But you
for
have no
sex.
sense of secrecy with Tsongkhapa. You don't get a sense that there's anything secret there, that it seems to be laid out in this way. And you don't get to see that.
Well, it's kept secret within the culture because
Yeah.
aside from monasteries and so forth, people can't read, and they're kept busy doing all sorts of things that, although I must say, a good deal of tantric ritual, which is considered to be was supposed to be restricted to the highest of practitioners, is done on a daily basis by the really common practitioners. I don't think the argument that he makes is it really wasn't public. The Dalai Lama has chosen to make it public because of misperceptions on what he sees as misperceptions about Tantra. Mantra also surpasses the bottom of the page. Definition vehicle due to being a path for those with sharp faculties, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So then, look on the bottom of page 127, the view of the definition vehicle is only an emptiness, free from dualistic elaborations. The two truths are not realized as undifferentiable, primordially abiding with a nature of gods and mantras. What does that mean? Primordially abiding with the nature of gods and mantras. What he's saying is primordially abiding with the nature of gods and mantras is that these things, these kruds, actually are, from the very beginning, primordially, were all gods, goddesses, and speech, you see, is all mantra. You with me?
So that is why the two truths are not realized as undifferential?
No. Within the, if they were undifferentiable, they'd be, everything would be primordially abiding with the nature of gods and mantras. I understand how the sentence can be read many different ways. They're not realized as undifferentiable. A qualification of undifferentiable being that everything is primordial, that everything primordially abides with the nature of gods, within the nature of being gods and mantras. You see, in the mantra vehicle, conventional truths, he's going to say below, don't exist. Why does he say that? Because there's nothing cruddy. Everything. All beings are gods and goddesses. All speech is mantra.
Isn't that the conventional view from his perspective? The conventional view is everything is gods and goddesses and modern. But the ultimate view for him is that it's all just the expanse.
I wouldn't say that really. It jumps around, I have to admit. It jumps around. Yes?
Could you define what does he mean by the expanse?
Generally, the expanse is identified with emptiness, but it is a combination of emptiness and basic mind. All right? So then the question comes, what is the relationship of these pure appearances within this combined emptiness and basic mind? What is the relationship? Are you going to separate them out as seemingly, at least seemingly, is done so by Tsongkhapa, where ultimate truths are one thing and conventional truths are another? that this body, for instance, is a conventional truth. It's its emptiness of inherent existence, which is the same entity as it, but different from it. Okay? These are the two truths. So for Tsongkhapa, they are something like this. But for Long-chen-pa, the expanse, which is emptiness and basic mind together, and these pure phenomena are emanations of that expanse. Thus, there's no crud. So if something is an emanation of the expanse, it's not like the expanse produces it and it gets separate from it. It's so fused with the expanse of reality that these appearances themselves are gods and mantras. They're also called uncompounded. Even the appearances is a wild vocabulary for a Buddhist to use for appearances. These gods and goddesses and mantras are uncompounded. Why? Because the expanse of reality, which is whole and utterly together with basic mind, is uncompounded. Thus, anything that is an absolutely pure emanation of it is going to be uncompounded. It's also called these are all greatly permanent. In Tibetan, this is Dakwa Chimbo. So you're trying to take the vocabulary that's normally usually associated with the ultimate and bestow it on things that even on appearances.
So is it Long-chen-pa that says there is
Yeah,
no
sorry.
conventional truth?
He does say this at some point here.
Okay, so
But he also says that ultimate truths and conventional truths are undifferentiable. And one way of saying that is to say that conventional truths don't exist, meaning cruddy conventional truths don't exist.
okay.
And these gods and goddesses, sometimes he'll call them conventional truths, right?
Okay.
But sometimes he doesn't want to call them that because that tends to mean they're cruddy.
Yeah,
Shifts vocabulary. Why not?
so it's the cruddy part that doesn't exist.
It's the cruddy part that doesn't. And then that part that's left over, for instance, the image on the movie screen. Is it just screen? You know? Once you stop superimposing all of this separateness and your desires and your fears and so forth on the images of the movie screen, you can allow the screen to shine in its own light. Undifferentiable screen and beings of the screen.
What does Tsongkhapa say about the cruddy? Conventional truth?
He says crud is crud. That we are cruddy. Our causes come out of ignorance, out of a misconception of inherent existence, and we're crud, and our bodies are crud. Most of what we're involved in is crud. And when you do deity yoga, you're purposely substituting something else in order to become used to this higher type of life that you're eventually going to get. And then, as we were saying sometime, he has the problem that if a Buddha walks into this room, the Buddhist, from his or her point of view, sees only endless purity, doesn't see crud. So then you say, is the Buddha's eye consciousness then non-valid? You ask that question. Is it non-valid? Now, Buddha could not have a non-valid consciousness. Okay? So then, what Tsongkhapa tries to say is that a Buddha sees the crud because other people see the crud. But then you wonder, geez, then how do you do that? You know? And on the Nying-ma side of it, if everything is really pure, then mistake is really pure and so forth. How do you posit error? You posit it within the artifice or dynamism of the basic mind, which, as I was saying, people start talking about it, the dynamism, then here's basic mind, here's the dynamism. It's sort of separated out. Whereas often in Gilu, it gets quite separated out, right? You get the crud world, and it begins looking as if the pure world is somewhere else. So, what should we do now? Would you read the rest of the Long-chen-pa chapter, and instead of attempting to read only one paragraph a day, which is fine to a certain point, to get into it, but say, what's going on here? What's happening? What are they talking about? Like this one, that was so hard to read. When you see it, it's not that hard. It's extremely hard to understand, but I don't want to go too fast and I don't want to go too slow. So let's do one more time on it, and then we will move on to the 4 Tantra sets for the time after.